Welcome everyone to AE911Truth Webinars. I'm Richard Gage, AIA. I'm a member of the American Institute of Architects, and I am the founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, now numbering thousands of architects calling for a new investigation. I'm very excited to be here today, week 2 of our 4-week webinar series. Every month we do 4 weeks, and I'm joined by none other than Andy Steele, our operations coordinator. Andy's with me here. Hi, Andy.
Hey, Richard. Hey, everybody. I just want to remind you, as I always do at the start of these webinars, that you can submit your questions to us about the material being covered in today's webinar via the question box beneath the screen here at ae911truth.org/webinars. Also, the video defaults to a low resolution. We can't do anything about it, but you can. You can click the gearbox beneath the video screen, click 720 HD resolution to see the images in clear and crisp pictures, and that's what you want to do because there's a lot of important information being covered here today in this webinar. So that's my piece. Richard, back to you.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks for being here to help out. You guys know it takes a village to put something like Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth together. We have very dedicated staff, dozens and dozens and dozens of volunteers, and it still takes more. So I'll give you an opportunity to help us later on. Right now, I want to announce a very exciting symposium that we're having in New York on September 10th and 11th, a weekend event. Many speakers lined up, all happening at the Cooper Union School of Architecture. And it is really incredible because we have keynote speakers like Judge Ferdinando Impassamato, the Honorary Supreme Court President in Italy. Very exciting. He's coming all the way over from Italy to address how can we prosecute the crimes, the real crimes of 9/11. He prosecuted those involved in Operation Gladio in Europe, particularly Italy, and he's joined with another keynote speaker, Daniel Sheehan, the attorney for Karen Silkwood. The Karen Silkwood case worked with the Iran-Contra scandal, Pentagon Papers, amazing advocate for the people. In fact, that's the name of his book, The People's Advocate. He will be here. How can we prosecute the crimes of 9/11? Is his topic as well. We have many technical experts testifying about the evidence that you'll be hearing on today's webinar, which will be starting in just a moment. But in New York, we'll be looking not AE911 Truth, but others who are co-sponsoring this event, co-sponsored by a number of organizations, including 9/11 Consensus Panel, Truth Action Project, Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, and New York Legislative Action. We are going to have, therefore, a number of topics that are off topic to AE911 Truth, including 9/11, a strategy of tension, World Trade Center science, education, and research laying the groundwork for justice. We'll be giving a presentation ourselves. We'll be introducing Leroy Halsey, who is embarking on an independent review, computerized dynamic analysis of World Trade Center Building 7 from the University of Alaska. He's halfway through a 2-year project. We'll show you how you can help and learn more about that project. Also, we have day 2, several attorneys, probably a total of about 10, who are hearing the evidence, commenting on it, talking about the state of legal justice for 9/11 and lack thereof, of course, but ideas, things they want to do, projects we will be employing that you can help with. But today we're concerned with Building 7. Why? Building 7 is, oops. I just had a funny thing happen to my computer. Building 7 is the third tower that collapsed on 9/11, and most people know absolutely nothing about it. And therefore, we're going to be looking at this destruction today. It happened on the afternoon of 9/11 at 5:20. And most architects and engineers are completely unfamiliar with the third tower that came down on 9/11. And that's why when we go out and we talk about this third tower, we are all about getting it out in front of the people, the professionals, even elected representatives. As we start up this PowerPoint once again, you're going to be introduced to this 800-foot tall building, half the height of the Twin Towers, easily the highest building in most of our states, but also we didn't even see it come down on 9/11 on the media, with very few exceptions. So we'll do a quick review today, including looking at the American Society of Civil Engineers, FEMA, and NIST reports on it. We're going to go into more depth, though, today with the NIST computer simulation, the NIST report, the problems with it, what they've overlooked, the analysis of the fires in this building, and we'll look at what structural engineers have to say about it. First of all, a little bit more about me. I'm a 28-year architect working on these $3 and $10 million gymnasiums a few years back, and this $125 million high school, which I had the construction administration responsibilities for, and construction documents and construction administration for this $400 million project in Summerlin, Nevada, near Las Vegas, with 6 blocks of retail and some high-rise, mid-rise. They call it high-rise in Las Vegas, but it's mid-rise, really. Office space. Altogether, about 1,200 tons of steel framing. I'm joined in this effort, though, by more than 2,500 architects and engineers who have placed their reputations on the line, calling for a new investigation of not only Building 7, but the Twin Towers, which we'll be looking at next week, the Twin Towers. But you're going to find out the reason why they've signed our petition on this website, calling for a new investigation of the destruction of all 3 towers on 9/11. So do check our website for additional information, evidence, frequently asked questions, videos. You can volunteer. You can sign our petition. There's resources here in our online store, and plenty of technical articles and other types of articles that will be of great interest to you. But what we do at this point is focus on the science of the World Trade Center destructions. And we have a question, in the scientific method, which we've had for 100 years or so. How did the towers come down? Well, how have other towers come down? We do some background research. We line up what makes the most sense. We make some observations. We construct a hypothesis. It's our best guess. How did these towers come down? Well, I think they came down by fire. Well, maybe they came down by controlled demolition. Well, maybe there's another theory that brought them down. All the hypotheses are laid out and looked at rationally. None are excluded based on our personal, professional, or political bias. We'll take a look and see how NIST did with respect to that objectivity, which is the purpose of the scientific method, because we can winnow error from truth, fact from fiction. So we test those hypotheses with experiments after making predictions. We analyze the results and we draw conclusions. If the hypothesis is corroborated, we report the results in an open, transparent manner so all can build on the body of our work. If the hypothesis is not corroborated, we go back and we construct another hypothesis that has a better chance of standing up against the data, the experiments, the background research, the observations. So, for instance, NIST, in their hypotheses, they did not report their results in an open, transparent manner. It was not peer-reviewed in any kind of appropriate sense of the word, and they did not reveal to the architects and engineers what was in their black box of computer input data, which they withheld. And we asked them for that information. And they said, no, I'm sorry. If we were to release that information, it could jeopardize public safety. Well, wait a minute. You have an unprecedented collapse by fire of a skyscraper, and you're not going to tell us how you justified your conclusion, which we're going to be going through in detail today. It's the architects and engineers' responsibility who design these buildings to ensure the public safety. Well, this is just one example of many of non-transparency. But we proceed by gathering data in the scientific method. For instance, a review of the forces that have destroyed buildings. Well, we looked at several of these before. Certainly fire was one of them. Last week we looked at earthquakes. We looked at more detail of fire. We looked at explosions and how they can bring buildings down. Fire is an organic process, though. It burns out an area 20 minutes or so and then looks on, seeking fresh new fuel sources. So when a building comes down due to fire, and we'll find that no steel frame or concrete frame high-rise has ever come down due to fire. But say in a wood frame building, you'll have an asymmetrical process. The building will fall over in stages. It doesn't just collapse straight down through its own structure. The unburned structure below, particularly in the high-rise with 40,000 tons of structural steel that a building would have to crush in order to collapse all the way down to the ground. It just doesn't happen. And we looked at that last week, and we'll look a little more this week. But how would we expect steel frame buildings to behave?
The way in which steel frame buildings behave in fires depends on their construction. In this test, done by British Steel in 1995, a large amount of typical office furniture was burned to see what would happen to the heavy steel beams that supported the ceiling.
When steel is bare, when it heats up, it gets weaker. It's not that it melts in a fire. In fact, the fires, normal fires, are not hot enough to melt steel. Even if you were, for example, to use an unusual fuel like kerosene, you cannot achieve temperatures hot enough to melt steel. But what happens is it starts to lose its strength. And as it loses its strength, it starts to sag. It becomes softer and sags and can no longer support the load.
This was the largest test of its kind ever conducted. It showed how unprotected steel can be distorted even by a normal office fire. But as is typical in steel buildings, the structural beams only slowly and progressively warped and sagged. There was no chance of a sudden collapse.
In over 20 years, I have not seen, until recently, a protected steel structure that has collapsed in a fire.
This is very important background research. And until recently, he's referring to building 1, 2, and 7 of the World Trade Center, all of which collapsed due to primarily fire, as we'll see. So here you have a 2,000-degree fire, Fahrenheit, exceeding by a factor of 2 what normal office fires can even get to. You saw all that stacked up, a cord of wood in this building. In 1995, in the UK, the biggest test of its kind, and they couldn't cause the collapse of this steel frame building. Unfireproofed. Now, Building 7, as we'll see, was fireproofed, and it still collapsed. This building was unfireproofed, and it didn't. So this is very, very important data, background data, which we do in the scientific method, collect and preserve. Let's apply this information to this third tower. Again, most professionals are unaware of this. 47 stories tall, the tallest building in most of our states. Now, it wasn't hit by an airplane. And most people, as we found last week, are completely unaware of it. Dan rather saw that it looked like a controlled demolition, like those old hotels in Las Vegas. Well, we're going to take a closer look today. The third high-rise to collapse in the afternoon of 9/11. Here it is, relatively undamaged, had some damage. And that damage, NIST says, was not a significant factor in its collapse. And it's standing, though, just fine after the collapse of the World Trade Center, which you see. Well, what we're going to do today is compare the features of this building's collapse to the features of a typical controlled demolition, which we looked at last week. And I encourage you to go to the archive of one of the week 1's seminars. I think last week was recorded. And take a look at that if you're just joining us for the first time. But do we have a sudden onset of destruction at the base of the structure? Well, let's listen together. That day on CBS.
And what you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building. It's amazing. Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by world-class dynamite to knock it down.
Well, those words are very helpful. Dan's using his intuition. We've all seen those old hotels in Las Vegas on TV, and sure enough, it looks exactly like that. Would we not have expected NIST, therefore, to seriously examine the hypothesis of controlled demolition? But they didn't. They focused on fires. We'll get back to that. Is there a straight down symmetrical collapse into this building's footprint? Let's take a look from West Street as we watch this building come down. Seems pretty symmetrical. Look at the penthouse. The whole penthouse in screen wall drop a half a second earlier than the whole building. Now, the east penthouse had collapsed about 6 seconds earlier. We'll come back to that. But in order for the rest of the penthouse to collapse a half a second earlier, that would mean that all the core columns underneath it, around the elevator shafts, would have to have been removed somehow. As we'll see, NIST says fire did that, causing an internal failure. We'll come back to that. But take a look with Building 7 on the left, known controlled demolition on the right. Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives, especially since every high-rise that has come down almost has come down by explosive demolition, and none have come down by fire, the official cause of this building's collapse, according to NIST. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked by Congress as an agency of the Bush administration to explain the collapse of all three buildings, all three high-rises on 9/11. These are the fires blamed by NIST for this collapse. And these are the worst fires that we have photographic or video evidence of. And they're burning on the 12th floor, where NIST pays attention to the initiation of collapse. They are indeed burning, but at 2:30. But the collapse begins at 5:20. And these fires, as you'll see, are burned out over an hour before the collapse of this building, which blames long span beams associated with this column 79 in the northeast corner of this building, called underneath the east penthouse. And the reason they focus on column 79, because indeed the east penthouse does collapse about 6 seconds prior to the overall building. And so NIST says, well, let's look at those fires. Oh my gosh, they were burning. But the problem is those fires are out over an hour before the collapse of this building on those floors, which NIST cites as the initiation of collapse due to thermal expansion. Thermal expansion would require that fire to be operational, over here, as NIST claims, at 4 p.m. and even 5 p.m., 20 minutes before the collapse. But the photographs, as you saw and as you can see here, those fires are out on those floors over an hour and a half, actually, before those buildings come down. So more likely, the fire progression scenario travels like this: 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock over to here. Remember, there's only 20 minutes of heat, of fuel available for a fire in any given area. So it's got to move on. And they don't show that happening. They show that fire for more than an hour and a half in this area around column 79, even at the time of the collapse. Well, here's column 79 during construction. Here are the beams which NIST says expanded, pushing this girder off of its seat laterally on this column 79, causing floor 13 to fall on 12, 12 on 11, and etc. for 9 floors, eventually causing the collapse on the east side of this building, allowing around column 79 a pancaking collapse, allowing it to buckle and causing the complete vertical collapse. And that's what they say allowed the east penthouse to fall 6 seconds prior to the overall building collapse. But all this was going on before that. Well, none of this could be true for a whole variety of reasons. And this is what we want to take a look at today. First of all, we saw that that fire was burned out, and over an hour and a half in this area. So it could not have hung around and heated up these columns. It was moving on. It did move on. But even if it were here, we would not be able to heat up these columns, as you saw in that major test in the UK in 1995. Unfireproofed columns didn't even fail. And these are fireproof, so they could not have even heated up in order to expand because they're fireproofed. So they're insulated. That's pretty important. And even if they could have expanded, they could only have expanded enough to push this girder halfway off of its seat on this column Not even that. NIST at first claims, oh, it didn't have to push it all the way off. It only had to push it 3/4 of the way off, and then this flange folded because it was the only thing supporting that girder on the edge of this seat. Well, that flange couldn't have folded because that flange is stiffened by these stiffeners, which NIST conveniently left off of its drawings and its analysis in the computer. They say it wasn't necessary because that flange was put there for web crippling. This is the web, and indeed the stiffeners are designed to support the web, but they also support the flange from folding, which is NIST's whole initiation of collapse theory. So, but even if that could have happened, these beams are the heat that in this computer is applied to these beams all in a second and a half, all at once, forcing that beam to expand beyond what it could, rather than sag, as we saw in the tests in the UK. That's very important. But even if this beam could have pushed this girder sideways, it couldn't have done that. It wouldn't have moved because this girder has shear studs or pins tying it to the concrete slab above the metal decking, as you see here. It's a composite slab. Like typical slabs, they have shear studs tying them. The drawings show 30 shear studs. NIST ignores those. They say they weren't there, but the drawings show them to be there, as well as on these beams, 32 studs each, which NIST says popped off in the case of the long span beams, and they ignore them altogether in the case of the girder. So even if all that happened and this floor 13, this girder failed underneath this floor 13, the floor 13 wouldn't have fallen on 12. There's 3 other girders supporting it, massive girders, robustly tied into this column. They would not have broken. So you wouldn't have had the pancaking slab. But let's say all of them failed. What would happen? This floor might not even reach this floor. If it did, there's not enough force because it didn't come crashing down. It would have fallen in stages, and not enough force to even start a pancaking collapse, and it would have been localized only here and arrested very quickly. But let's say that happened, and you had an entire internal collapse, as they claim, of all of these floors. Well, all of these beams are tied to the perimeter steel structure as well as they are tied to the interior. In fact, even more so. So you would have had the exterior perimeter structure pulled in by all of these beams, and you would have seen a massive deformation in that exterior of the building. The videos would have shown it. Massive breaking of concrete panels, massive breaking of windows. But that's not what we see. As you can see in the video, compared to NIST's computer model, which we'll be looking at next, here you do see the east penthouse collapse 6 seconds prior to the overall building collapse. You don't see massive deformation of the perimeter structure. The collapse of the east penthouse, therefore, appears to be an isolated event because you do not see a series of broken windows traveling vertically down the east face of this building, in this case, the north face. So what you do see after 6 seconds after the collapse of the east penthouse is the remainder of the screen wall and penthouse collapsing half a second. That would indicate complete core column damage, which is not shown in the computer modeling by NIST. They do show 400 structural steel connections failing every second, which would be required in order for the building to fall at free fall, but they still can't get their computer model to behave anything like the free fall symmetrical 7-second collapse of World Trade Center 7. So it's completely unjustified by their own computer model, which they stopped 2 seconds into its collapse. Why? They don't show us what happens after 2 seconds. Why? Well, it begins to tip over. It begins to actually show what would have happened in any kind of a natural collapse, massive deformation of the exterior perimeter structure. This is very important. So all of this requires a new investigation. And indeed, our FOIA requests have requested the input data. We've been denied. They can't withhold information unless it's national security. They have another out, which they used with us. As we mentioned, they said it might jeopardize public safety. Well, we think it would jeopardize the safety of a public agency like NIST, which should be much more transparent if that information were to be released. More likely the case. Well, the building does fall pretty much into its own footprint. The center of this pile is in the center of the building, a classic observation of controlled demolitions. How do we get a building to fall symmetrically into its own footprint? Well, you have to remove all of the columns virtually at once, or it begins to fall over. As we mentioned, fire does not cause the symmetrical collapse of buildings and has never caused the collapse of any high-rise building. Well, you'd have to take out all 24 core columns a half a second prior to the perimeter, because we saw that center penthouse come down a half a second early. Can fire cause this level of precision? That's an important question for all of us to wrestle with. How fast is this building coming down? Number 4, typical features, says it should come darn near free fall acceleration. Well, NIST actually admits this in their report after being confronted by members of AE911Truth in a public conference, embarrassing them into admitting this after they have lied about it, saying it didn't come down at free fall. That would have meant there'd be no structure underneath. Well, exactly. Something happened to that structure underneath, but they do not acknowledge the implication of this free fall admission, which is that all that structure had to be removed instantly, which is obviously cannot be done by the imperfect, organic, asymmetrical destruction that fire causes. And is there a total dismemberment of the steel structure? Well, it's pretty well broken up, ready for loading and shipment. It falls like a house of cards. This is a moment-resisting steel frame structure, robustly designed to resist collapse, which this building did not have the capability of resisting collapse. But had it been a natural collapse, we would see 20 stories of twisted steel, partially collapsed building, like we see here, for instance, in buildings that collapse due to natural causes, in these cases, earthquakes, where the building is broken up, but still recognized as a building. It tipped over. It didn't fall straight down through the path of greatest resistance, all the tons and tons of columns in the building. And its concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder. Is there minimal damage to adjacent structures? That's one of the goals of a controlled demolition. And we do indeed have minimal damage to the surrounding structures, some damage though. Well, we're going to jump down because we looked at explosions and pyroclastic-like clouds last time. Let's look at the chemical evidence of cutter charges left behind in this incredible heat. Well, the FEMA report author Jonathan Barnett himself says the steel members in the debris pile appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures. What does it take to evaporate steel? 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. What is the temperature of normal office fires? The official cause of this building's collapse. 500 degrees, maybe 1,000 degrees. So here's the beginning of a lot of evidence we're going to take a look at that shows that the temperatures at the site were 4 times what the official story can even explain. More evidence here by Abolhassan Astani Azal, the structural engineer. We had complete access to this steel under the National Science Foundation grant that he had acquired, yet he doesn't explain it. He sees the melting of girders. Now, steel doesn't melt till 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, 3, 4, 5 times the temperatures of the fires in this building. Even FEMA documents in their report that came out in May of 2002, in this Appendix C, the complete metallurgical examination, which is the results or a summary of the peer-reviewed paper that they had submitted. What do they find? Indeed, they find the melting of steel, once again, mysterious sulfidation and oxidation. Well, sulfidation, sulfur is used with thermite to cut through steel, like a hot knife through butter. Where else would the sulfur have come from? Well, some have suggested it might have come from the gypsum board, because that's calcium sulfate. Well, calcium sulfate is not sulfur. It is bonded. It doesn't, it's inert. It is never in the use of the 100-year use of gypsum board to protect steel structures. It has never turned around and caused any kind of an attack on the steel. So the experimental process shows us that that does not explain the sulfur. We'll see what might in a moment. Never before observed in buildings, they say, eutectic reactions, which caused intergranular melting, the melting of steel, causing a steel girder to turn to Swiss cheese appearance, like you see here. This has not happened in fires. The firefighters are looking at each other saying, oh my God, the steel is melted. They've never seen this before. They don't know how to respond to it. Thus, the metallurgical examination, which happened here by FEMA, which, by the way, when NIST took over the investigation in 2002, they threw out this critical examination of the steel by metallurgists, fire protection engineers, and others, and it did not appear when 6 years later they came out with their final report. 6 years plus 2, that's 8 years after, well, 7, I guess, exactly, after 9/11. Juggling this hot potato, literally. Rapid oxidation, sulfidation, intergranular melting, very well documented, but not explained at all. Liquid iron, that's molten iron, that's 2,800 degrees. Sulfur attack on the steel. Well, this is all direct evidence of explosive destruction, in addition particularly to the evidence we looked at in week 1, the overview of Building 7. Fire can't create any one of these, we believe, let alone all of them. Fires like World Trade Center 5 completely engulfed. If any of the World Trade Center towers were going to come down, would we not expect it to be 5? Nope, it didn't collapse. Mid-rise and high-rise office buildings that are fire protected do not collapse. Not even in China, where in 2009 we had the complete 44-story conflagration from top to bottom. One of the hottest fires ever. Did it collapse? Here's before on the left, afterward on the right, toasted around the edges, but still standing, remodeled, getting back into use. But these small fires brought this building down in under 7 seconds. We don't buy it. 2,500 architects and engineers don't buy it. Unprecedented. Well, what about the FEMA report and the NIST reports? There were some official investigations, well, starting with a group of volunteers that were put forth by the American Society of Civil Engineers. Now, these are not your average volunteers. These are civil engineers who have expertise in blast resistance, like Gene Corley, who have federal contracts, which might cause them to be biased. 2002, FEMA put out their report. They had $600,000 of funding. At least they had some funding. But they all were denied access to the drawings of the buildings that they were asked to explain the collapse of. They had limited tours of the site and of the steel, which was being cleaned up at a rate of 400 truckloads a day being shipped to China for recycling. So they were complaining about that, but they didn't get the shipment, the illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene. They couldn't stop it. So 2008, NIST came out with its final report. It says, hey, the building came down due to fire. Normal office fires. Not damage to the building by World Trade Center 1 when it came down, even though there was some damage. Not damaged by diesel fuel fires, as they originally told Popular Mechanics, which touts that as a false reason that NIST has denied subsequently. Not by shaking of the ground when the Twin Towers came down, but by normal office fires. Well, look at the folks who worked their way through these individual reports from beginning with the FEMA report here after the volunteer report. The Weidlinger report, which was never published publicly, and the NIST report. Gene Corley worked his way all the way through there. And all of these individuals had some input in Popular Mechanics, who attempted, as you may remember, to produce an article and then a book, and then another book, attempting to argue that those calling for a new investigation have no merit. Well, they actually said in that book, there's no architects or engineers. These people are, and by that time, you know, we had like 1,300 architects and engineers by the time their book came out. And they surely must have known that, because we have made a big issue. And those who are using our materials, the most credible materials in the 9/11 Truth movement, have seen fit to give them to all of these people, all the media, all the government elected representatives, but they don't report it because it is too devastating to their false account of what happened to these towers. Well, FEMA in their report suggests implosion. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 had a small debris field as the facade was pulled downward, suggesting an internal failure and implosion. Yeah, we think so too. What happened? Well, here's what the experts say. This one not associated with AE911Truth. Hugo Bachmann, Department of Structural Dynamics and Earthquake Engineering at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. In my opinion, the Building 7 was with great probability professionally demolished. That was 5 years after 9/11. Kamal Obeid, one of our 100 structural engineers, signed on to our petition. A localized failure in a steel frame building like World Trade Center 7 cannot cause a catastrophic collapse like a house of cards without a simultaneous and patterned loss of several of its columns at key locations within the building. That sounds like controlled demolition to me. There are many other experts. You can find them in the film 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. We'll be looking at that in a moment. Was there foreknowledge of the destruction we would expect if there was a planned controlled demolition, that some people would be aware of it? And indeed, even the fire chief says, we're moving the command post over that way, this way. That building's coming down. And then there goes building 7. They were expecting it to come down. Indeed, they had told their firefighters not to go into the building, that it was in danger of coming down. And they said there was an anonymous structural engineer who said that the part of the building was pulling in, the exterior of the building was pulling in. We don't know who that engineer was. It's just all these unknowns. Well, Indira Singh, an EMT worker, says that they told us to move the triage site because building 7 was going to come down or was being brought down. They actually use those words, being brought down. Who is it that's telling you this? And indeed, she goes on to clarify that it was the fire department. They said they were going to bring it down. It was coming down, or they were going to bring it down. Not the fire department bringing it down, but that's what the fire department said somebody was going to be doing, which is very interesting, especially in light of this set of witnesses, construction workers and police officers walking away from building 7, hearing an explosion behind them, looking back at the building, and then looking straight into the CNN camera saying this.
Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down. Watch it blow up. Move it back. All right, guys. We are talking about the building about to blow up. Hopefully, debris coming down.
The building is about to blow up, flame and debris coming down. What are they talking about? Here we're talking about volition again, bringing the building down. Well, let's refer for more of this evidence back to last week with all these evidence of explosions, witnesses of explosions. And for right now, what have we learned? Is the hypothesis corroborated with the evidence we looked at last week and this week? Do we have all 10, in the case of both weeks, evidence of typical controlled demolition? Is there direct evidence of explosive destruction here? We think so. We want to know what you think, and I hope you'll, as you're collecting your questions, Andy will be able to feed those to us. We want to know what you think here. What are your thoughts about this? What are your questions? Because we don't think fire can account for any one of these key typical features. And with additional corroborating circumstantial evidence, we believe this is proof of controlled demolition beyond a reasonable doubt. So with that in mind, if you're convinced that we need a new investigation, there's some things you can do. You can sign our petition calling for a new investigation, particularly if you're an architect or engineer. But we also have 20,000 others who have signed. But we do need to collect our numbers up to 3,000. We're trying to before September. So please join us. become a member of AE911Truth for as little as $2.50 a month. You can join us. You can be a part of the 9/11 Truth movement. You can support the staff that are doing so much work, like going to these annual conferences of the American Institute of Architects and the regional conferences and the structural engineer conferences. This is the work that we're focusing on this year so that we can go into the national conference in 2017 in Orlando of the American Institute of Architects and take 1,000 AIA co-sponsors co-sponsoring the resolution calling upon the AIA to call for a new investigation. So support us with your donation and your membership and volunteer with us. We've got lots of things that we need you to do right from your own home and your own computer. Is that right, Andy?
That's right. We are in a renaissance of information and the ability to communicate with each other from all over the country. And what's good about that, and in particular with this issue, is that you can help us out right from your own home. We have many opportunities for you to do that. A lot of great projects coming up, as Richard just mentioned, with the important stuff that we're going to be doing in the coming year following the anniversary, and we're going to need all the help we can get. So if you are moved by this evidence, you want to help out and do something, even if it's simple, just go to AE911Truth.org, click the What You Can Do tab at the top, just fill out a quick application, simplest application you'll ever fill out, and we will get in touch with you and get you on a project. Very simple projects you can do right after work for a few hours to help out the AE911 Truth and the movement overall. So we are imploring you to please help out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andy. And by the way, there's things you can do without working directly with AE911 Truth. You can write your elected representatives to send them the links to our videos and our website and say, hey, have you looked at this? There's 2,700 architects and engineers now calling for a new investigation. Television, radio, newspaper, tell everyone you know. Send the AE911Truth.org link to every architect and engineer in your community. You can screen the DVDs. I'm going to show you one in a minute. Speak to new audiences. Share our resources. We have brochures. We have a new evaluation you can support, learn more about. A 2-year evaluation, computer dynamic analysis by Professor Leroy Hulsey, one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country, is active at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks. We've contracted with him for $300,000 in 2 years. Do you think that needs support? Do you think I have $300,000? No. This is why we need your support. It's very, very important for all of you to support us. And you can learn more about not only Building 7, but the Twin Towers in our landmark publication, 55 pages. And one of these versions has the DVD in the back, 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. But you can get the PDF for free right down below where you're probably watching this webinar on your computer. On our website, click Get Beyond Misinformation for free. Or you can go to our website if you're not on it and just click sign up for the free monthly email newsletter or bulletins and news flashes, and you'll get this for free also. So that's pretty exciting, because in it you will see more detail of this film, which we put out 3 or 4 years ago now, and very exciting. Here's a 2-minute glance at it. Take a look.
I don't want to be involved in conspiracy theories. There are lots of them. They can go on. We can speculate on that forever. What we really need to know is how those buildings came down.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fire fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
To undermine scientific integrity is to undermine our democracy.
This is what NIST has done, denied and ignored crucial evidence.
The American people absolutely need the truth of 9/11.
More than 1,500 architects and engineers, and 12,000 others, including many scientists, have signed the petition calling for a scientific investigation of the destruction of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center Building 7. The report, issued by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, referred to as NIST, was not valid science.
They're talking about a single columnar collapse or failure that resulted in a total collapse of the building.
Building number 7 descended in free fall for the first 100 feet, which means that there was absolutely no resistance to descent whatsoever.
So all of the columns really needed to be severed at the same time.
The symmetry is the smoking gun.
NIST has admitted it went into free fall for 8 stories.
You don't need to be an engineer or an architect to see what happened to those buildings.
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten. Zeker weten.
What I saw, it was a classic implosion. The center of the core, the penthouse area, starts to move first, and then the building follows along with it.
NIST excluded the documents from FEMA and Appendix C that documented the evidence of melting steel.
In an office fire, you cannot generate enough heat to melt steel.
There were these iron microspheres present in all of the dust samples. They needed to have been formed in extremely high temperatures.
All the characteristics of the microspheres, along with what I see in the attack of the beams that were actually found, tell me that thermite was involved.
In the dust, what we had found is a modern version of thermite, which we call nanothermite.
NIST concedes that they found no evidence for explosives. So then we asked them, well, did you look? And they said, no, we did not look for explosives or residues of explosives.
And in fact, the evidence is overwhelming that these red grade crystals are very high temperature incendiaries.
And we have watched as scientific integrity has been undermined, and scientific research politicized in an effort to advance predetermined ideological agendas.
If this is a crime, I think everybody agrees it's a crime. Evidence was removed from the scene of the crime. You can't do science when you are deprived of the evidence and when your hypothesis is the least valid instead of the most likely. And the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned. This is not science.
And indeed, the 1-hour version of this film is free. It's on the YouTube. You can search Experts Speak Out. It comes right up. But the 90-minute version is available on our website in our store. And you can find that under What You Can Do at the top of our website. Another film, which is also available to watch, the 1-hour version, is Firefighters, Architects and Engineers Expose 9/11 Myths. That's on YouTube. And again, the 90-minute version is available in our store. In this film, Eric Lawyer, Firefighters for 9/11 Truth and Unity, has 200 firefighters with a statement of support calling for a new investigation. And we together knocked down the NIST reports, and Eric uses the National Fire Protection Association guidelines, which was helped to be created by NIST, but which they didn't follow any of the guidelines therein. So he goes through that piece by piece, and then we provide the evidence for the explosive demolition, as you've begun to see in week 2, which we just completed this week. What's happening next week? We look at the Twin Towers with an overview of the explosions, the sudden near free fall collapse of this building, high velocity lateral ejections, the shattering of its steel frame, complete shattering all the way down to the ground, and the pulverization in midair of all of this 90,000 tons of concrete. That's pretty important. So we're going to look at that. And right now, I believe we have some questions, don't we, Andy? Let's put those up on the group chat so that I can read those as you're saying them too.
Sure. Our first question asks us if there's ever been any debates between AE911Truth engineers and those who disagree with us.
Yeah, we've had a few debates. One of which was with Dave Thomas and Richard, another author at the he's at the University of Berkeley campus in the physics department, I think. He works for the UC lab at Berkeley. These two, we have a debate. You can search on our website, just type debate in there. And this was actually done on multiple Pacifica radio station, free speech radio platforms in Houston, Berkeley, WBAI. A very famous debate. And here we have very brilliant physicists saying things like, of course, Building 7 could come down at free fall. How could it come down any other way? After all, it's 90% air. Things like that. Things like, well, just take a straw in a Coke cup, for instance, that you get from McDonald's. Push down that straw. Well, once it goes, it just goes. This is, of course, not only an inaccurate, completely absurd analogy, but we don't have the force. The columns in these buildings are designed 5 times stronger than they needed to be to keep this building from going anywhere. And they all have to be removed. And they go down, and when they are, the building drops symmetrically. The straw that you push down does not collapse symmetrically straight down through itself. When it goes over. It's very important. And so what we're learning from the people we're debating with is that, particularly in the case of these two, they actually have to resort to what we can only call insincerity or lies. And I was really struck personally by Michael Shermer, another person we debated with on live radio, who said all kinds of things, mostly simply parroting the straw man arguments in Popular Mechanics, who will not debate with us. Michael Shermer is the founder of Skeptics Magazine, or the Skeptical Inquirer, whatever it's called. And he's really fun to debate with because he actually doesn't do his homework, and he ends up looking really, really bad. The one person we have had a very interesting debate with on technical terms, who was more sincere, I believe, is Chris Moore, who is not a technical person at all. Interestingly enough, he's a minister and a musician and a composer. And you can find that debate, which was done in Boulder, on our website. The audio is there. And he actually explained the freefall collapse of Building 7 like this. Like, first, the interior went down, and without explaining how it went down symmetrically, but it went down, and then it actually pulled down the rest of the building because kind of a rubber band effect. So it went down, and because the beams were tied to the exterior of the building, it actually pulled it in a kind of a catch-up routine, or rubber band pulling it faster than free fall, which ended up being right at free fall. So there's a number of reasons that that theory doesn't work. But anyway, those are 3 or 4 examples of debates which we've had, which are very interesting. And we have an open challenge to any architect or engineer to debate us. We haven't actually had any, and we'd very much like to. When we do, they simply parrot what the official FAQs and debunkers cite, and it's actually quite easy to say why those don't make any sense. I did debate one of the debunkers outside the White House when I was visiting the White House. I was touring. I didn't get invited to present this evidence to the President of the United States, although I'd love to. But this gentleman had blogged at the forum where the debaters, the master debaters go. He was called the director, and you can search. I didn't name this video, but this is how you can find it. It's got like, I don't know, 500,000 views or something by now. Gage hands his ass, Gage hands debunker his ass, something like that. You'll find it pretty quickly. Again, I had nothing to do with that title. Anyway, I hope that helps.
Okay, we try to keep this family friendly, but the internet doesn't help us. And it sounds like Chris Moore's argument sounds like one of NIST's FAQs where they claim the interior went first and then the exterior, but you wouldn't have that without massive deformations, as you said when you were on C-SPAN, taking place on the outside. So that explanation doesn't hold water even for laymen. Richard, our next question is this: has the company that insured Building 7 investigated why it went down, and what were its conclusions?
Well, certainly one would expect that an insurance company who had to pay out millions, altogether $5.6 billion, to Larry Silverstein for the collapse of these 3 towers, would look for any conceivable way to get out of paying that money. And unless, and we don't have these details, but actually there are other researchers in the 9/11 Truth movement who do suggest that the insurance company had more to gain than to lose by paying this insurance claim. In fact, it's been found by others that Swiss Re, the reinsurer, was actually involved and investigated during the 9/11 Commission for their part in betting or putting put options on the airliners that lost significant value the next day after 9/11. Part of the scam by Deutsche Bank, who the investigation of the 9/11 Commission went up to their doorstep as to the source of these put options, where they were betting that the fate of the airliners would go down the next day, and people made lots and lots of money this way. But they said, well, since Al-Qaeda wasn't involved, we didn't actually pursue this. There's actually another interesting set of researchers who look at the financial shenanigans going on in the towers, such as the Black Eagle Trust, which $400 billion was wiped off the records in bonds that came due the next day after 9/11. But because of the extraordinary emergency measures put out by the Securities and Exchange Commission as a result of 9/11, never had to be collected. So that's not our research, but I think it's important to mention some of these things to help give a context to answer questions like this that are really valid questions and point you toward researchers like Kevin Ryan on Journal of 9/11studies.com, who has written a book called Another 19 Suspects, and others like David Ray Griffin, who have written 10 books now on the subject of 9/11, so that people can get a broader context in which to understand the devastating implications of the destruction of these 3 towers, because we're only looking at the science, but there's many, many other questions, as this one implies.
Okay, our last question today asks, why are major organizations like AIA so silent about the evidence you talk about?
The American Institute of Architects rubber stamped the NIST reports for the explanation of the destruction of these 3 buildings and the reports that they did. The American Institute of Architects works for the richest people in the world, building these skyscrapers and major developments all around the world. Their members do. The AIA represents architectural and engineering firms that are beholden to the richest people in the world. My guess is, and I have no evidence to support this, that they can't afford to tell the truth, that they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I think we're the hard place, or we're the rock. We're bringing forth the evidence, and they allow us into their annual conferences. And there's a lot of controversy on the floor as people come by and crowd our booth. We're the most popular booth. As you look up and down, you know, everybody seems to be talking to the 6 or 8 or 10 volunteers that we have on duty, telling people about the 3rd tower, showing people the Twin Towers. And so there's a growing level of interest that is directly contradicting the awkward silence from the American Institute of Architects, particularly in their national business meeting, in which 400 of these top architects are trying to conduct business, but they have this resolution put forth last year by 100 of our members, which are AIA members. So they have to deal with this. And last year, they shut down the debate before it could really even begin. And yet we got 3 times more votes than we got the year before. 11% of the vote. Next year, we expect 20 to 30% of the vote. So their silence, while understandable in the terms I just highlighted, is going to have to be evolve in response to the greater and greater controversy which we bring to the table every year. So I hope that helps.
All right, and I elect that we are the rock because the information we stand on is sturdy and firm, and I would say NIST is the hard place to get any good information and sound science. So that's the way I see it. That is going to conclude it for today with the questions. We want to invite everyone back to next week's webinar, same time, same place. And if you are moved by this evidence, you know people in the building trades industries, please invite them to these webinars, view them, spread the archives around, and show them to whoever you can. Richard?
Thank you so much, Andy, and thanks, everybody. We will see you next Thursday, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, right here, same place where we'll take on the Twin Towers. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.